Wanna talk? So let's talk. Here. Talk. You wanna talk? You gotta talk, you need to talk. News talk.
I talk, you talk to Solomon. I talk, you talk to Solomon. Yeah, let's talk to Solomon. Talk to Solomon.
You gotta talk, you wanna
This is Talk to Solomon. Thank you for joining us. My co-host,
Chief Steve.
former Police Chief Steve Davis. My guest is Dr. Alan Keyes. Alan, I have major news to impart to you and to America, and perhaps the world. According to Gallup, the George Gallup organization, Christianity does not include Catholics. Did you know that? The big headline is this.
Yeah, well, no.
Listen to this. 34% of Americans say Barack Obama is a Christian, while 44% say they don't know. And then they say total Protestant Christian, 34. That's Christians, Protestants, Baptists, United Church of Christ, and Methodists. And then they say others would be Muslims, no religion, Catholics, and others. So obviously they don't group Catholics with Christians. Is Gallup that stupid? Or are they trying to sell this line of lunacy?
Well, I gotta say, Stan, that I certainly know Catholics who are not Christians. I know all kinds of Christians who are not Christians, but I'm not sure that the Gallup poll is the one I consult when I'm trying to discern that. I think I rather I would consult the wisdom of my true leader. So you folks are always looking for leadership. I always tell them I'm not looking for a leader. I have a leader. His name is Jesus Christ. He gives really good advice about this. And he makes it very clear that you must look for the fruits. And that you must also make sure that whether it's words or all kinds of ritualistic actions that you are looking to see in it, the love of God and the Spirit of God. And so I think that advice is probably better than taking a Gallup poll about it. But it does show that these folks approach these things in a way that is filled with strange biases, don't you think?
Really. In fact, I've always believed in the turn the other cheek. So if someone questions your faith, show them your Pelosi. All right. Now.
Oh, and by the way, Stan, I have to make it clear that I am a Roman Catholic. So if anybody thought I was saying I know Catholics who are not Christians and that was some kind of a disparaging remark, no, not so intended.
Yes.
And I'd like to add, as a Catholic as well, that if the news media ever wants to know whether or not Catholics are Christians, go to any Catholic church and identify the guy hanging on the cross in any Catholic church, and you'll know the answer.
And you're either
no, I would have to say one thing though. Final point though, if the Gallup poll or the Gallup people were basing their categorizations on visits to places like Notre Dame these days, then I can perhaps understand the conclusion.
There you go. All right, now let's get to the question that they did the poll on, and that is Barack Obama of any particular faith? Is he a Catholic? Is he a Christian? Is he a Muslim? Is he wizzy? I mean, I believe that Barack Obama worships Barack Obama. I believe that to him, any faith and all faiths are simply another vehicle to utilize to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish, and he bows to no God. He may bow to every sheik and prime minister and president around, but he doesn't acknowledge or believe in God. I just don't accept it, and it seems that many Americans also don't accept that he's of any particular faith or that he has a faith. And I think that is a monumental change in the history of this country, to have an out-of-the-closet agnostic at the best in the role of president.
Stan, I think that one of the things you do have to do, though, is to try to get people to focus on why this is at all relevant. Because some folks would sit there and say, well, what does it matter whether they're this, that, or the other thing? And at one level, I've got to confess, I think that the leftists and the media, most of whom have no particular interest in faith or God or anything, they want to foment a deep concentration on these kinds of questions in the hope that that will then have the let's you and him fight syndrome at work, particularly in and among Christian people, so that there will not be a union and a unity in spirit and truth that then faces the reality of the real threats to our country's moral life. So I am always a little worried of that. And that's why I always try to remind people. For me, the reason I focus on this is very simple. And it's not a question of this or that, because I don't know. I don't have that power that some people seem to have to look into people's hearts. I just have to rely on where Jesus told me to look. At tangible fruits, at things that are coming out of what folks do, at whether this corresponds to what is made clear in the Scripture and the example and words of Christ of what is godly and what is Christian, and try to make a judgment about those fruits. Now, on that basis, I have certainly many times pointed out, and never been abashed about it, that when I see someone whose fruits are, for instance, the taking of innocent human life, which God declares to be an abomination, an approach to human sexuality that includes embracing behaviors that God declares to be in the Bible an abomination, I don't have to worry about is he this, is he that. I look at the fruits and I say the fruits are that one is standing in opposition to that which in the Scripture and in the teaching of the church are things that are abominable and unacceptable to God. And so I can base a judgment on that as a Catholic Christian, as a person who looks to Jesus for guidance. I can also base it on the other inescapable fact. We are a country founded in terms of our understanding of politics and justice and the much vaunted idea of rights that is so much talked about in our society. We are a society founded on a simple premise that we are all created equal and endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. To secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. All the things, the elections, the notion that it should be government of, by, and for the people, that government is constrained by the need to respect the rights that come to people from God and can't just trample on them because these policymakers want to get somewhere by destroying life, livelihood, robbing, stealing, murdering, whatever they want to do. They can't do it. That basic premise doesn't make any sense if there is no Creator. You see what I mean? Let's see. We are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights. If there is no Creator, if there was no creation, then we are not endowed with rights. Then rights consist in whatever you can get Barack Obama and Alan Dershowitz and Mitt Romney and all these others to agree on. You really want to trust your rights to these people? Because it seems to me that whenever society has had government power based on the idea that government decides what rights people have, it turns out that the people in government have all the rights and all you've got the right to do is what they tell you. Isn't that a strange coincidence? Yes. I think we're wise to that. I think we're wise to that. And so that's the other reason I think it ought to be of great concern to people, because if you don't believe in the Declaration, then you're not going to uphold the Constitution that was based upon its principles. And you are going to take this country exactly where Obama is taking us, down the road to socialism, totalitarian tyranny, and despotism, and a state and situation in which the only people free in any sense of the term will be the cronies of those in power.
That is unacceptable. Chief?
Well, there's also a saying that says, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And since I believe Barack Obama hates the United States of America, other people like Islamic leaders that hate America are now his friends.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why he rushed to embrace them when one of them won the presidency in Egypt. The Supreme Court came out with a decision that says that you cannot have a penalty that says life in prison without the possibility of parole if the perpetrator of the crime, no matter how heinous, was at the time he committed or she committed the crime a minor. Now, most of us, when we hear the term a 14-year-old, which is the case in question here, we think of a 14-year-old. And we say a 14-year-old is lacking life experience, is immature, is subject to peer pressure, is subject to physical duress, and they therefore understand. By the way, this was a 5-4 decision with Kennedy siding with the liberal 4. I am old. It's been a long time since I was 14. But I look at what's happened in this country and in others, and I say, I believe a judge, a state legislature, a jury, an appeals court, a state Supreme Court, and then, if necessary, a federal string of courts can overturn, can remand, can undo such a decision. We don't need a rule that says you can't give it to begin with, because there have been cases of premeditated, cold-blooded, heinous crimes committed by 14-year-olds. I think of the God's Liberation Army, where the entire army was 11, 12, and 13-year-olds, and they did incredibly awful, unthinkable things. I disagree with this opinion. I'm going to start with you, Steve.
Well, I'm first of all opposed to any law that mandates something without any type of discretion on the human beings involved. Just like I'm also opposed to machines arresting people, like red light cameras. But in this case, what should happen is they should allow for someone to be incarcerated forever, but also not make it mandatory. That way the people that are involved with each unique case can decide on the facts and the merits of each case, decide what should happen to those people involved.
Alan?
No, that makes a lot of sense to me. I think it's kind of telling, don't you, Stan and Chief, that we have judges now who want to forget, want to do all kinds of things that judges shouldn't be doing. They want to be legislating and dictating and destroying the Constitution in various ways, the way the Supreme Court, I think, is trying to do with its recent ruling on the Arizona law. They want to do all of this. So they want to do all kinds of things that are inappropriate. And then they make a decision like this that reminds you of why you're supposed to have judges. Because you can't write the law in such a way as to take account of every circumstance. And so you need to have judges, you need to have juries, you need to have people who can look at the details and the circumstances and make a judgment that's based on the unique details of the individual and the individual case. And you want to leave the leeway so that you can take account of the fact that you've got people who are 14 and quite capable of cold-blooded, ruthless murder and being assigned the moral responsibility for it, and you've got others who are obviously incapable of it. And so writing a law in such a way as to act as if you should exclude all judgment about that when you know that these particulars exist, it defies common sense. But that's true of a lot of the decisions that are taken by our courts these days.
Well, you know, the flip side of this coin, too, it's kind of similar, is where the executive branch becomes legislators by not obeying a law, just like the Obama administration refusing to obey and enforce the illegal immigration law. They're in effect creating their own legislation by not enforcing the law.
Or DOMA.
You know,
and it's not a case-by-case basis, it's a blanket effect.
Well, I was reading the syllabus, anyway, of this decision that was taken by the court on the Arizona law. Some people are trying to pretend, by the way, that it was some kind of a victory for Arizona. I think this is just nonsense. What the court essentially said, they claim they upheld the provision of the law that allows the policeman to ask and look for evidence of whether you're an illegal alien. And that is true for the time being. What they actually did was to say it was premature to make a judgment about that, and it would be up to the state courts to do so. Now, then what they did was knock out every provision that allowed you to do anything about the information you got, right? Now, this might be kind of clever game that they're playing, but are people really supposed to be so stupid that they look at the court and the court is saying, oh, well, you can ask them about and get this information, but you can't do anything about it because all of that is up to the federal government. And what is even more, and this gets to the point you were just making, Steve, it reminds me, by the way, of provisions in some of the I think it was agricultural programs where they paid people not to grow things, right? And folks actually made a pretty good living not growing stuff. Well, here we have a decision in which they say if Congress passes a law that has the aim of doing things that will help to regulate immigration and enforce those regulations, then that includes the discretion not to enforce the law. Think of the consequences of that, y'all. Think of all the different ways in which Barack Obama, as he just did, can decide not to enforce the law and then can force it on the states not to enforce the laws of this country. I imagine a time will come when he'll decide not to enforce the election laws and try to force all the states to follow suit and not have elections. Why not, if this is what you can do? I have to tell you, I found the reasoning in this particular court decision to be one of the most juicy examples of plain absurdity that I have seen in a court decision since at least Roe versus Wade. But it has consequences, y'all, that are incalculable.
And
if it is allowed to stand, because it essentially destroys the meaning of the oath to uphold, protect, and defend the Constitution, which is the supreme law of the land. So you can uphold, protect, and defend the Constitution on a routine basis by not enforcing the supreme law, by not enforcing the laws which, according to the Constitution, you are sworn faithfully to execute, right? And this opens up a vast field of things where you will then be able, for instance, to allow people to come into the country, allow them to do your bidding, murdering our citizens, and not enforce the laws against them for the crimes that they commit, and not allow the states to do so. This is how absurd this reasoning is. And I think it is aimed at producing an absurd result that essentially has us in a position where the occupant of the executive branch, not distinguished, by the way, in the opinion from the legislature, which is a travesty, can do what he pleases. Final point. This is directly in contravention of the responsibilities of the U.S. government. For instance, I think it is fair to say, don't you, that all this illegal immigration, the tens of millions of people coming contrary to law, burdening the infrastructure, some looking for jobs, some looking to do mayhem and carrying drugs and bringing weapons and doing God knows what. I have said, and I believe it is literally the case, that that constitutes an armed and unarmed invasion of our country. Okay? And there is an explicit provision, Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution, which says that it is the obligation and duty of the government of the United States to protect each of the states from invasion. Okay? And what's more, there's an article, a section of Article 110, which talks about the powers that the states don't have, makes it clear that they don't have the power to make war except when actually invaded. See? And that means that the Constitution recognizes that the states don't have to roll over and commit suicide because the federal government decides not to respond to an invasion of our country. They retain the right to defend their citizens, to defend their territory. And that is all that Arizona or any other state would be doing in the face of a lax enforcement of our border security and our immigration laws. And what I find interesting is that these articles of the Constitution of the United States and these responsibilities of the government of the United States were, as far as I can tell, nowhere argued or even thought of in the course of this supposed decision. And I'm wondering why. why you would leave out the fact that what Barack Obama is doing actually violates an explicit responsibility of the government of the United States. Why you would not discuss the fact that the aim and intention of Congress in regulating immigration has in part to do with fulfilling that responsibility. And it cannot be rational to suggest that that aim is then achieved by not doing so and trying to force the states to remain naked to their enemies. This decision is a travesty. And the people who are trying to argue that it was some kind of breakthrough are just being taken in. And I think it's time we stop being played for fools by these people.
I couldn't agree with you more. You want to comment on that?
Boy, no, that you said it all. It was great.
All right. Speaking of saying it all, this final story about Larry Brinken. Does anyone know Larry Brinken? Larry Brinken is Mr. Human Rights for homosexuals. He was in, of course, San Francisco. He served for 22 years on their Human Relations Council. He created all of this, hug a homo stuff, and he just got arrested for child porn. I don't mean a 15-year-old having homosexual sex, which I'm sure he's done personally, although I don't know him, don't want to know him. No, 1 and 2-year-olds. 1 and 2-year-olds for a service he paid for and got sent to him, and it turned out his service provider opened, however they do it, saw the pornography, alerted the FBI, who alerted the police, who arrested him. And of course, I have said, and I'll say it again, homosexuality is based on pedophilia. All homosexuals don't practice pedophilia. I'm not saying that. But homosexuality is based on pedophilia. It's based on adults having sex with children. And this is just one more of a million instances where so-called whatever, homosexual activists have been unmasked to be pedophiles. Or, in this case, purchasers of pedophilic pornography. Now, will they prosecute him? No, probably not. If they do, they'll plea bargain it, and he'll pay $10, put on 7 condoms, and say something. But I believe this man should get put away. He's 66. He's not a kid. He's not even a middle-aged person that can say going through a midlife crisis. He's just an old pervert. And I believe that this is a perfect example of the abomination that Alan alluded to earlier, that we are told that homosexuality is. That's what it is. I'll stop before I get arrested. Chief?
Well, pedophiles can never be rehabilitated. If there was ever a need for a death panel, this is the reason why.
Alan?
Because whenever I find myself talking about this, and I think of 2 things. One, the wholesale effort that is now going on in our society to make sure you cannot speak any truth about this. That facts will be suppressed, and that therefore only mythology that favors the special privileges and status they're trying to create for homosexuality, only those things are going to be allowed. The other thing I think of, Stan, which I think ought to be on the minds of every American, given the deep importance of what is involved, is that on account of what has happened over the course of the last several years, we have now unleashed this sort of homosexual assault in the context of our military. And so you read stories that now they're having pride days for homosexuals in the military, and they are announcing very clearly that it's going to be enforced in the chain of command by the Code of Military Discipline and so forth. If in situations, whether it's teachers and students or coaches and so forth, you got a situation where folks were exploiting their position in order to take advantage of young boys and young kids, what do you think is going to happen to our young people going into the military now?
Well, you'll
What do
change
you
the
think is
nature.
going to become?
You'll change the
of
nature
that
of who'll
whole-
go in.
Well, first you're going to encounter what will be this transition period where folks will be experiencing the real effects of this bathhouse culture being introduced into the military. And then there will be an exodus. And then the folks who are left will be folks who will not feel the continuity with the rest of society that has generally been true of our military. I was raised a military brat, and I know this for a fact. So I think that we have come into the midst of the most dangerous times in the history of our country. And that this is one of the symptoms of how far gone things are. And folks who are treating these issues as if, well, I don't want to be against somebody loving whoever they want, and I have nothing against that, don't get me wrong. They're not thinking it through, Stan. And sad to say, I think folks like to pretend that what's in the scripture it shouldn't be talked of. We should cut it out with scissors, and they're going to give us a better Bible by removing this. And I say, no, maybe it would be wiser if we took the wisdom there seriously and looked clear-eyed at the consequences of what we're doing. Final point. I have never understood something, Stan. I think I've said this before, but I like to say it because someday somebody's going to explain to me how this makes sense. There are people who profess to be Bible-believing, deeply sincere Christians, right? Who then also profess to say that they have nothing bad to say about homosexuality, they support homosexual marriage, and so forth. And that's because, and then they go through the usual rigmarole, they're born that way, it's genetic, it's this, it's that. Now on what you might call the first page of the Bible, we are told male and female he created them. In the image and likeness of God created he them, right? Now let me see. That is not only telling us something about ourselves, male and female he created us. Since it is juxtaposed with reminding us that we are made in the image and likeness of God, the fact that our creation was not complete until Eve was created and there was that distinction between the male and the female, that gives us food for thought about what God is trying to tell us about himself through that distinction which he made in the physical manifestation of our common humanity. So, Stan, how can people say they believe in the Bible and believe in Jesus Christ on account of the Bible and put it in practice and all this, and also that they embrace, trust, rely on God, and take a position that suggests that he lied to us about ourselves on the very first page?
Well, the answer is simple. They're not being honest with themselves and or with God. And on that note, God's a good note to end on. I thank you, Alan Keyes. You're, as usually, on your game and impressive. Chief Steve, who will have to go and report me for my homophobia, and from me. Thank you so much. Good night. Good night.
Good night.
And
Good night.
Good night, America.